Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Valerie Singleton. Although if I am, that does sort of suggest that perhaps she's now better known as Thos. Well, the name Valerie Singleton for many of us immediately conjures up Blue Peter, and it is in the world of Blue Peter that we're going to be staying for this episode of Musical Talk today. Because as promised last week, when we were talking about Peter Duncan's magnificent online Jack and the Beanstalk, I said that today we would hear the conversation I recorded with him at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 2010, when we were talking about his one-man show. And Peter is no stranger to attending the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, because I saw him again a couple of years ago in 2018, I think it is, when he was appearing in a dramatic play about an embittered elderly actor who still was playing pantomime dames. And the show was called The Dame. And Peter was very effective in it, because the show was very much about the sadness and loss of the character, rather than the upbeat pantomime dame character that person was playing. But what that tells you, I think, is that Peter has theatre running through his veins. And indeed, in this conversation, you'll hear that is exactly the case. You'll hear about his childhood and his show business family, and of course his love for theatre and musical theatre, and, of course, pantomime. His Jack and the Beanstalk that we spoke about last week was remarkable and a highly enjoyable piece of theatre translated to video. And you could tell with every beat that it was something that he absolutely loved. He's a man of great enthusiasm, and I think that comes across in this interview. So, let's wind back the clock almost 11 years to a characteristically wet afternoon in the grounds of the Pleasance, as we huddled under a plastic umbrella to avoid the downpour, and where I had this wonderful conversation with Peter Duncan. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Well, the show really it's difficult. Is it confessional? Is it retrospective? Is it completely cranky? I mean, it doesn't fit neatly into any category. I mean, because it was Edinburgh, I kind of thought, well, I'll try and create some kind of narrative, because I've called it a theatre piece. I didn't want to call it musical theatre, because that puts, unfortunately, some people off for this kind of crowd. And I wasn't bold enough to call it stand-up, so I've called it a theatre piece, really. And actually, the title, it might just be the two of us here, but there's my eldest daughter sitting opposite, sewing my Charlie Chaplin costume. She came up with the title, so we really worked on the idea of whether we should call it Duncan Dead or Blue Peter Gnome or something, but Daft and Dangerous kind of summed up the heart of it, really, because in essence I start off being chased by a truck, I die, Andy Hamilton and Brian can't come back as God and the Devil decide to give me an hour to prove myself, and then I spend an hour showing off, doing some Blue Peter stuff, pantomime stuff, and a lot of good musical theatre stuff, I hope. And at the end I get judged by the audience whether I should go to heaven or hell. And
what's been the general consensus?
We've done 9 shows, it's 5-4 to heaven.
It's a bit of a tightrope, if you don't mind me saying.
Yes, that splash of water was from the canopy we're just inside of, so we didn't get wet.
No, I'm very excited when I see you, that's the problem, I'm afraid. And how's it been going? Because, how did you devise what to put in? Because your career is hugely extensive, so it can only be a sort of little potpourri, a sort of selection box, really.
It is, really. I think I put the favourite bits in. I did do a tryout last year, and I did a couple of hours, and there was obviously a lot more material. And the hardest thing is that you've got a solid song to sing or a solid idea. It's often the links in all things that have some kind of narrative. The hardest thing is to work out how to go from one thing to another in a seemingly effortless way, really. And of course there's bits of audience participation as well, which gives it the edge, which is unpredictable. So I know everybody comes up to Edinburgh, works out their routine, but I suppose if you've got a bit of history, you kind of enjoy being a bit fearless about it and just seeing where it will go. But at the same time wanting, I think people always think, they forget there's performance comes in two kinds of places, really, where you have a very definite, clear, particularly musical theatre, it's very accurate. Obviously your melody, there's timing, there's pitch, and although a song can live slightly differently with a different audience, it has to be accurate. It's not like standing there doing stand-up where you can amble through something, but then the links
song, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, no, you can't do that, but then the links can be a bit more ambled. But then sometimes impro that you think's impro is not impro at all, it's pretend impro. So it's a complex business.
I think the show really flags, as I've said, it shows so many aspects of your career, of which pantomime is a very clear part, and I love pantomime, British pantomime, that is. I think it's such an important part of British theatrical culture, and slightly sneered on for some reason in certain circles.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, really, and I love it partly because it formed most of my childhood, because that's what my mum and dad did. They used to put on pantos and old-time musical shows in the summer, so I grew up, surrounded, literally, as I say in the show, I grew up in a wardrobe, really, surrounded by props and costumes and the sort of all that strange world of panto performers, sort of men dressed as women dressed as men,
hobby, haven't you?
Exactly, so I was. It was a strange but very open, liberal world, which you can imagine in the sort of late 50s and early 60s was, it's not such a liberal world now. So, but I was, it was a very open-hearted life of people trying to make a living from being singers, actors, dancers, performers. And
well, your father, you say in the show that your father was one of the great last beat performers, if you like.
He was. He put what they call an alfresco show, or a fit-up, on Redcar Sands, end of the 40s, which, and Redcar, because it's got these huge hands, had a big history going back 150 years, but he was the last guy to put a show on called The Wavelets. Alan Gale's The Wavelets, it was called, if anybody remembers those days. And literally you'd build, a bit like here in Edinburgh, some of them, they're just sort of wooden structures.
Things, aren't they, really?
Yeah, but on a nice day, people would sit in a deck chair and you'd go round and you put sixpence into a bottling it was called, and then you could while away the afternoon watching the show.
And that's a huge British tradition, completely gone now, which has actually created so many people. Max Miller started in those, Tommy Hanley started in that as well.
Yeah.
Names may not be so well known today, sadly, but really significant parts of 20th century culture.
Well, I tried in the show. I do a skit on Charlie Chaplin, really, and I suppose I try to allude to the idea that so much of what exists now always comes from the past. So when you think of like Chaplin and Stan Laurel, who before there was TV and certainly almost before there was films, all that existed was going to see people in a theatre. So all the skill of comedy and all the skill of knowing where an audience is looking by all the business on a stage, these guys learnt their trade, and they took it then when the movie started. They took it into film. So
it's the Carno group, essentially.
Yeah. And that was the beginnings of almost anything that is certainly kind of humorous and populist. The variety world and vaudeville in America was the king of everything, and in a sense Edinburgh has a feel of that's come back a bit, really, but I think people just don't remember who were the first kind of guys to do it, really,
and who solidified what we now accept, because I think you're right. They took the slapstick, the stage stuff, solidified it into film in character, of course, but so much of that trade was carried over from the stage, from the musical, and that's been assimilated and homage, shall we say, up to where we are today. It looks like it's changed, but it's still essentially the core, straight back to Victorian musical, which is fascinating.
I really think it is, and I think a lot of that physical energy and that sort of strength, the fitness of a performer really does count as well. It certainly counts in musical theatre. It's akin to sort of being a performing athlete. You have to be so fit to do it, in the terms of just recovery, so you can, do something very physical and then be able to sort of knock out a ballad 30 seconds later. Your recovery has to be quick.
Now, you have, Peter, if I may say, a really extensive career in musical theatre. Just early on when I was watching you on Blue Peter. You left Blue Peter. You're one of the few presenters who went and came back again. But you left Blue Peter to appear in Pump Boys and Dinettes, I think. Is that right?
I did. I'd sort of always done musicals a bit before, but the first time I left Blue Peter, it really kind of kicked off, and I did do this lovely American musical, Pump Boys and Dinettes, and it was based on 5 guys who ran a gas station in the deep south, and we were all English guys with Joe Brown, Clodagh Rogers, and Lindsay DePaul, and
Joe Brown, the great singer.
Yeah, strange kind of cast. But y'all spoke like that, and go and get your petrol here. And I used to sing this fantastic song about Dolly Parton, which is an original song. How I was completely infatuated by Dolly Parton, and she pulled me onto a coach one night and took me for a ride. It was on her coach, and of course, and so it was a.
Not on her luggage, right?
No. So it was great. It was great fun. I did that for 6 months, and I think.
Where was that?
That was in the West End.
Because it's not a show that's been revived, is it? I mean,
it's toured a bit, and
it's on the Tales of Greece in a way, isn't it? Sort of thing.
Yeah.
In that style, would you say? I mean,
it's more. It's actor musicians, so we all played in the band. I played the bass and guitar, so it was more. Yeah, it was more like a bunch of good old boys getting together and having a good time, waiting for a customer. Yeah. So that was great fun. But I think what happened with musical theatre with me is that I did a musical in '92 called The Little Tramp, written by an American, and Charlie and Cameron McIntosh came and saw this musical, which was on at Basingstoke, a good rep theatre, and he was looking for somebody to be in his revival of The Card, which Jim Dale did originally.
That's the 1973 Hatch and Trent musical, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And but didn't you do that recently in Regent's Park?
Yes. Well, what happened was that Cameron came and saw it and was doing a revival at Newbury, and I eventually, after doing this massive audition about 14 times, I got this big lead part, which was, in musical theatre terms, it's like getting one of the top roles, because you're competing against everybody. And then a year later we revived it at Regent's Park, and then it was going to go into the West End, but it didn't quite make it. But that really set me up in being a musical theatre performer, because.
Now, when was that? Did you say?
That was '94. That
really?
was.
Now, that's quite interesting. I mean, how did you find The Card? Because it is occasionally revived, and as you say, it was Jim Dale's big. British hit, wasn't it, before he went over to Lubana, which is another connection that you've got as well. I was going to say, are you the British Jim Dale? But obviously he's British too. Are you the latest British Jim Dale?
Well, I don't know. I might have to be that vibrant. As long as I stay fit, and the right part comes along. I'd love to keep doing musical theatre forever, but because I think it's akin to playing your big Shakespeare role, or it just encompasses everything about a performer that is joyous, really. But it's a tricky business, because they need to cast the big musicals with people who are kind of top-notch stars now, and then of course, unless you've got grounding in musical theatre, it's quite hard to carry it, and so many qualities come in. And so sometimes it's nice to do musicals not as someone who's particularly well known, just to be part of a good ensemble company is nice.
Tell me about The Card. It's, as I say, it's a show that people know about, but don't so much know.
Well, it's based on an Arnold Bennett book called The Card, which is about a character who's a washerwoman's son called Denry Machin, and it's set in the Potteries. And the story itself was adapted to the stage by Keith Waterhouse and Willis Hall.
Great
the first time around. You did Billy Liar, and so
Russell Gummidge on television as well.
Had great pedigree in terms of the book part of it. And I know Tony Hatch has written themes to
every
Crossroads, and he has a huge musical heritage, and we recently did a Friday Night is Music Night with him, and I was on singing his famous hit Opposite Your Smile, and of course he wrote all the big hits for Jackie Trent and Vicky Carr, and so his portfolio is huge. So, but he wanted to do a big musical, and that was his big, in '73, that was his first kind of go at it. And so when we got to revive it again at Regent's Park, there was new songs. I wrote a couple of special sort of kind of Tommy Steele kind of Lock, Stock and Barrel, which is kind of.
He wrote those.
Yeah, they wrote.
Especially for you, then.
Yeah, well, especially for the show, to put new songs in, to kind of update it a bit. So, and then it had Jessica Martin in it, and Hayley Mills in it, and Jenna Russell in it, who's since had such a big musical theatre success since, and so it was a well-crafted package with good old musical performers, and we did eventually take it to Moscow.
Moscow?
Yeah, it went on a British Council tour, and it did tour the provinces, but it wasn't such a great time in the West End, and I just don't think it quite got the notices that it. And Cameron, I think, thought not this time. Which is, of course, if you're the star of the musical, it's a bit sad, but that's showbiz, as they say.
What was your best favourite song from it?
Well, the one I liked doing was this thing called Lock, Stock and Barrel, which was written in the style of Tommy Steele's Flashbang Wallop. It was one where you could run around and do lots of sort of physical tricks and just a full-on energy number, which was I could say vaguely entertaining, but it was entertaining, fully entertaining. Yes, yeah.
And you were talking about the energy, and you said theatrical athlete, and I think that's a very good way of putting it, because you are. I think the area of musical theatre you best accommodate is that kind of central character who's on stage a lot, who's got the energy, who's got the charisma, who can sort of carry it off. Who the show is named after them. The card is about that character.
Yeah.
You're in Barnum as well.
Well, yeah,
and you were Barnum.
I did.
I've had no small part, is it?
Interesting journey with Barnum, because I got asked to do a tent version soon after I'd left Blue Peter in '89. These two guys got the Barnum tent rights, and we put
just by Barnum tent. You mean a travelling marquee show?
Yeah, but in a big 2,000-seater tent, supplied by actually Philip Gandy, who's producing Moscow State Circus and Boys from Bangkok up here, which so interesting.
The best international tent provider available.
Yeah, but also produce these big shows. So I had a lot of experience. But we struggled a bit. It happened to be a very windy winter, and the producers weren't that experienced, so it kind of got pulled after 11 performances. The receiver came in; they ran out of cash, and it was really sad, because I think if it had got into the provinces, it would have worked. And I got I got sort of strangely complimentary reviews. I was doing big stunts in this. I did a thing called the cloud swing, which is literally swinging on a rope, letting go with your hands and swinging underneath it. If you...
Oh, a proper trapeze.
Oh, yeah. If you got it wrong, you would surely die if you got it wrong. And there was one lovely crit which said, if Peter Duncan chose between singing all of the right notes and saving his life, I think he chose the right course of action.
Oh, people are so...
Yes, well, that's the tricky thing when you're being very physical. It's also hard, being pulled by ropes. It's very hard to always keep that steady note going.
Barnum's such a great show with a great score, though. I mean, how did you? I mean, that's it's quite a challenge, is it?
It is, and I remember going.
I like the way, by the way, you take a challenge and make it more complicated by
adding
extra,
Well, it's just because I was on the edge of doing this particular musical thing. I mean, I could have. I knew I could do the tightrope walk, but I hadn't. I'd just done another show where I saw two French athletes. What do we call them? French gymnasts do this trick. So they taught it to me, over 6 months. So it's a 6-month training schedule to do this particular stunt. It's like being a proper circus artiste, really. So I kind of just wanted to add that in, really. But I think that the challenge of it is how fit, how you can keep yourself safe doing this, because you are doing lots of stunts surrounded by people who are also usually younger and more athletic than you. So, but it's a beautiful story, and I just heard the other day that Cameron Rakatosh has bought the rights Lock, Stock and Barrel, so we can expect to see it again soon. Yeah.
Now that's very interesting. Would you go for it again if the opportunity was still around?
I think I would do it again, yeah, but I suspect they'll get someone. Nah, of course I will.
If they come to you, you'll take it.
Of course I will.
Now the score, once again, is Si Coleman, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a great score. It's funny enough, it's one of those shows that people have been saying, isn't it about time we had a revival of Barnum? Because it was big in the 80s, and Michael Crawford and Jim Dale, both sides of the Atlantic.
Well, Jim Dale did it in the States, didn't he? Yeah. And then Michael Crawford did it here, but often people think Michael Crawford did it first, but it was Jim Dale, which really emanated from his early Scapino days, which he did with Frank Dunlop, who used to run the festival here, which was interesting.
I don't know what that is.
Well, Scapino was a great knockabout sort of show based on Commedia dell'arte, and it had songs, and that's where, and he took that to New York, and I think the Barnum thing evolved from that, really.
They saw him and wrote him a show.
Yeah, and Frank, who I came up here and did a show here for 20 years ago, was a very much almost a variety man, although he was running the international festival. He had that real connection to that old sort of variety world as well.
Which and I think that takes us back to what we were saying earlier about there's still that clear tradition all the way through.
There is, and I think it's there's an interesting story about Me and My Girl, which I toured taking over from Gary Wilmot for a while, whereby the show is is again one of these one-man kind of virtuoso performances. But an element of that which is particularly important is the comedy. And of course, when you did Present Me and My Girl, the producers were always profoundly nervous that they could get someone to sing, dance and act, but are they going to be funny?
Yes.
That was the thing that they feared most, that, you know, because it does rely on you getting the laughs as well as getting the...
Very sympathetic character, essentially.
Yeah. But the laughs are important, because the show dies, you kind of don't get the slapstick laughs, really. So I always remember doing an audition for it and kind of pretending I'd seen it 1,000 times, but actually I'd never seen it. And they kind of found out I'd never seen it, dispatched me to Birmingham to watch it 7 nights in a row. They were panicking.
You got it full on for 7 nights.
Yeah.
It's a great show, though, and it's 1937, the original version.
Yeah.
It was revived again in the 80s, and I think Stephen Fry was involved.
Yeah, he did update the book a bit, and he did bring in some of the Stephen Fry wit into it, really. And I think there was another couple of songs added to give it a bit more punch. I don't think it would have.
An old gay songbook, aren't they?
Yeah.
The Sun Has Got His Hat On.
Yeah.
But the famous song, which was always in it, is the Lambeth Walk, and that's a tear 'em up piece as well, isn't it?
It is, but it does go on a bit. I mean, I think it lasts about 20 minutes on stage, and
the Lambeth Constitution.
Yes, and in the old days, I think Lupina Lane had about 100 extras who would come on and all do the walk, which is probably why originally it lasted long.
It lasts 20 minutes. So how do you fill 20 minutes when you're doing the Lambeth Walk?
We do a lot of spoon stuff. Everyone gets a couple of pair of spoons out and does a spoon dance, and I don't know how it lasted long. Maybe it isn't 20 minutes. I think it's 12 minutes, but that's still long. It is, yes. It stops for Act 1.
But I mean, at the end of the day, if I were to just here in Edinburgh, where there's a huge number of very young, very moist people, I bet if I were to ask people to sing me at least the chorus of the Lambeth Walk, almost everybody around here could do that. Which, I mean, that says something to me. If everyone knows a song, then that's something special. To be singing that on stage it's actually quite a responsibility. Is it? Did you ever feel the weight of history on your shoulders?
No, because when you use a song like that, you kind of craft in. I think there's probably another couple of verses carefully crafted in. So, there's a kind of more melancholy kind of start to it, really, and because essentially the musical is about a love story, and like old-fashioned musicals always used to be. It's a rich boy, poor boy, and that routine, trouble and strife, and then they're all sorted out, and
boy
everyone...
meets girl, boy loses girl, boy meets girl again. It's still a staple. I mean, everyone says, we don't do that anymore, but yes, we do.
They do, because we all love, in the end, love stories about love. It's fundamental to all of us, isn't it, really? So we both looked at my daughter then, who's still sewing in the corner. Are you in love, darling?
Yeah, okay.
You're okay.
Can I ask, because you also get Leaning on a Lamppost, which is another iconic number, and of course you're fighting the ghost of George Formby on that one.
Yeah. But I mean, again, that starts because he's waiting for his girl to come, and you've had the whole backstory then, and he doesn't know if she's going to come, and actually she doesn't come at that point,
It's got a verse which people forget, isn't it? I'm leaning
on a lamp. Maybe you think I look a tramp, or you may think I'm hanging round to steal a car. But no, I'm not a crook. I could go on, but there you go.
It was fantastic, thank you. But it's a wistful beginning, actually. Which, people remember the chorus and banjo solo if you know the the Formby version. But it's actually it's amazing. But a 1937 show is still chock-a-block full of hits which people do know today. Maybe not Whistling at the Bus Stop anymore. But
I think it worked also because it's quite anarchic. I mean, there's a lot of clever set stuff that was put in, and the director. I think made it a bit crazier than the original.
Now, in that verse we've just mentioned, maybe you think I'm a tramp, and you did do the Little Tramp. In fact, you were speaking about it earlier. Now, tell us a bit about that, because you recorded a cast album of that, didn't you? With Mel Brooks, of all people. Who people don't know actually very often was a great book writer of musicals.
Yeah,
I mean, he wrote shows with Charles Strauss in the 60s.
He did, yes.
Before his recent. It goes back 40, 50 years on Broadway, and people forget that.
Well, this was written by an American, and I just went for the audition. I'd always had the love of people like Chaplin, and I had heard about the job, and I went for an audition, and I'd got with my lovely my musical director Mark Stevens, and we went to the audition, and we were late. And Mark and I always used to have this lovely relationship where I get very cross, and actually the energy of being late and we traced the music and decided to sing a song from the show that they hadn't given us, and do a whole, so we'd been rehearsing.
Research,
yeah, to try and get the job, really. And they were so enchanted, they gave me the job and him the job. So he became the musical director. And
a double whammy.
Yeah, and it was wonderful. It was directed by Adrian Reynolds, who had never directed a musical before, and that was a bit strange. Because I think he assumed on the first rehearsal we'd all know all the songs and the lyrics. We had to explain that we had to learn the songs first in a musical, but there you go. And the show didn't initially have any physicality in it. It was like a sung through, almost like an operetta, really. And so one had to introduce lots of physical stunts. So it was really kind of a work in progress. But it was very successful, and I did actually go to the States and try and pitch it for summer stock musicals there. But it didn't quite happen. But we did at the end of it record this fantastically glamorous album with I think the Philharmonic with Mark again, and lots of famous people singing the songs, including Lea Salonga sings a song in it. I do sort of almost a song with Mel Brooks, not quite with him because he was in LA and I was here, and Tim Curry sings on it, and who else? People and. I can't think of them all now, but there were loads of people on it, and it's a really classy kind of album, and that was about a year after we'd actually done the musical, so it's a lovely kind of memento to have.
So where was the musical?
It was at Haymarket Theatre, Basingstoke.
And how was it received?
It got some lovely, nice national crits, and it got lots of good local response. And as I said earlier, Cameron McIntosh came and saw it, and that really got me into the groove of doing big musicals. So it was a lucky break. So it was really good.
Why do you think it didn't really?
I think Cameron felt, because he seemed to remember that he thought it was and I think the Attenborough's film floundered a bit on the same problem, that it is such a long life.
Yes.
And you try to condense so much of the storytelling into the whole show, because if it's a biopic of someone's life. And I think that creates a kind of problem that you rush through things, and
it becomes episodic by its very nature.
Yeah, because all that political stuff where he became, this is the age of where he,
McCarthyite American 50s,
absolutely, and that's a solid chunk of the story. And he was really hounded out of America, as a lot of liberal artists were, and that's how he ended up in Switzerland. So his love affair with America ended, and then he was a tough operator, Chaplin, and he was an anarchist, and in the true sense of the word, that he didn't like the oppressive thing that the states have become, and the fanatical, anti-communist kind of ideology battles between the two countries. Really, he was just caught up in it, because he was always, as the little trap, battling against authority and the state, and he was seen as anti-state.
It's an awful irony, isn't it?
It is, really.
Bearing in mind he invented one of the biggest industries in America, more or less. Hollywood
Absolutely.
owes Chaplin so much.
Yeah, and when you think of the films now, like The Great Dictator, which was done, before Hitler, it was on the stage. He was lampooning.
I've had the privilege of seeing that in a cinema. So.
Yeah, well, he was lampooning Hitler before we all knew what Hitler stood for. We knew he was a fascist and not a very nice character, but we didn't quite realise. You couldn't, post the Holocaust, you couldn't have really made that film, but that was made before the Holocaust,
When he was still potential, he was a threat in potential rather than in actuality.
Yeah, lampooning him like
satire. Yes.
Yeah, like a lot of good current comics do now. When someone's not very nice, you make fun of them.
And you sing songs from the score of The Little Tramp, I think, in your one-man show.
I do. I've adapted one of the songs to do a tightrope walk on it. So I
dressed as Chaplin.
Yeah. So I talk about the history of Chaplin, and then go into a song as if he's just got to America and he's trying to pitch in and be a funny man. So I use the song of him discovering the little tramp, how to be the tramp, and I put a tightrope walk in it as well, just to make it more exciting.
It's actually very impressive, your little tightrope walk, if you don't mind me saying, and you do look as though you're going to lose your footing several times.
Yes, that's genuine.
Last night, though, I gather, and we've alluded to the fact that your suit is being sewn up as we speak.
Yeah, I did have a bit of problem that the braces broke, which when you're walking a tightrope with tightrope shoes doesn't add to the grip, yes. the small grip that you might have on a little bit of cheese wire in your shoe. So but I didn't fall off. But it was, while you try and sing and be funny and walk tightrope with your trousers down. I wish I could have been there to see it, really.
Presumably, though, I mean, it's just an extra laugh, isn't it, if your trousers fall down?
Yeah, I don't think they quite knew that. I think they thought it was part of the act.
Yeah, exactly. You can get away with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's a very Chaplin-esque thing to happen in a way.
It is, but not on a tightrope.
Now, you were talking about Mark Stevens.
Ah, my lovely Mark Stevens. Well, he died last week from cancer, and his funeral's today, actually. And when we got to do the fit up here in Edinburgh, he was he died the day we got here, and he was such a, like we all have our special people in our lives, but he was such to me, in terms of my musical theatre career, he was such a big influence on me, because we wouldn't exactly write music together, but being someone who's a performer, I would have an idea for a song, and I do a song in the show which is about musical theatre, which I sing as sort of Danny LaRue. Yes. And for a song to begin like that, I would say, look, I want to sing a song sort of as Danny LaRue about musical theatre, camp gentleman who goes to see far too many musicals, but it was also...
It's been known.
Yeah, so it's been enchanted by it, and he's in the audience watching it, and we'd build this song, and then he would get together with a guy called Chris Lana, who's a lyricist, and then we'd all jumble in. But in a sense, I wasn't the one who could really write the songs, because that was their skills. But between the three of us, for a lot of material, that's been something that we've done. So over the last 25 years, we've worked together in a similar way, and him and Chris up here in Edinburgh produced the island of Thos last year, which has got lots of 5 stars, and also Quirp about the frogs, and I know they've got a huge following up there. So there's, for those that love Mark's music and Chris's lyrics, there's 3 original songs which they've contributed to, and for me, I suppose the sadness thing is, and I'll have to be careful here. I don't want someone crying in an interview, but no, but he's sort of, he was defiant as a person, and tenacious, and he said that when I saw him before he died, he said, I'm not going to die because I've got so many songs I want to write, and and to be up here singing those songs, it's a profound experience.
It's
really.
A real tribute in a way.
It is a tribute, yeah. That certainly people can live on by their music. So,
but didn't he write the music for Eric the Viking, which is a musical you've been involved in?
He did. And I wrote some of that too. Yes, it was a musical kind of romp that we did about Eric the Viking, based on Terry Jones's book, and we wanted to adapt it. It was a piece for young people, really. So we got some Arts Council funding, and we employed lots of young people as we toured, and then we wrote these songs together, really, and it was a great romp, and it got great reviews, and we had such a lovely time. And that is 20 years ago we did that. So
20 years ago?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
So it's before the film? Was the film about that time as well?
No, where are we? 2000? No, I'm exaggerating. It's 15 years ago. 94 we did it, yeah.
But and you were in it?
I was in most of it. I didn't do the whole tour because I was trying to be producer, director, writer, actor, lyricist, composer.
Yes. It's a lot to do, isn't it?
Yeah. But I did half the tour because I think Eric got eaten by a dragon, the first Eric, so I took over.
Now, can you just remember some of the songs from that?
I can. Vikings are the strongest. Da 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 da. It was actually what we did was Mark was very keen on using a Fairlight, so which was in those days was I say it's a synthesizer, but it could also do sound effects. It was the early days where you could construct very credible music of samples, and don't tell the MU, but I mean now you have to kind of pay for it now. But those days you could produce fantastic scores for which you could track, and you could make great sounds, and we could also.
It's the beginning of that technology. Really,
yeah, and you could. We created all these big fight scenes where you could sort of create. Battles and swords clashing, and you could actually play the fight, and you could play sound effects. So it was wonderfully creative, the whole thing, really.
I'd like to talk about Dames at Sea, which you were in for a while, weren't you?
I did. That was, I think that was part of a sort of a mid-London festival, and I played the captain, and I think another part in it. I think I played 2 parts that I can't remember really. It wasn't the greatest role in the world, but it was fun for one particular reason, that I did. I forgot my name, my leading lady. Now it's a terrible thing to do. A big Canadian singer, famous lady. Anyway, she hopefully won't hear this, that I've forgotten the name, but I did have to do this big sort of operatic ballad in it, which I sort of sang as a spoof, really, but, the big sort of opera voice. And it's very sweet because my nephew, who was getting married, said, I love the show, but he didn't quite get the irony of it. He said, would you come and sing at my wedding?
Oh, on the strength of your operatic skills?
Yes. So I couldn't say no, so I ended up going to his wedding, standing on this balcony and going, and singing, what did I have to say? I know I had to say, no more talk of darkness. So I had to sing this.
Oh, really?
Yes, yeah. So I did Andrew Lloyd Webber with the full sort of, but that was fun. I haven't done that since.
I like the idea of, from one, but it is a spoof musical, isn't it? I mean, it was written in 1966, but it spoofs the 30s.
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah, and there was a very young, talented cast. Yeah, I loved it.
Now, Henry the Musical by Peter Duncan.
Ah, you've gone through my website,
I've
haven't
done
you?
my research. Yes, of course I have. This Is It, I believe, is a song from there.
Yes. Well, yes, that was really because I've always my musicality, if you like, began much earlier than my musical theatre career. So when I was very young, I got a guitar, as people do, and I was born in the era of the Beatles. So I had a kind of a pop career when I began, and I say I had a pop career, an attempted pop career, but I would always write lots and lots of songs.
Was this Cold as Ice?
Yeah, it was on Blue Peter. I did a single called Cold as Ice, which I
Many
think
of us bought.
got to number 99 in the charts, I think, and got onto the Radio 2 playlist. But so these were songs of a youthful, songs of unrequited love, really, which and I wrote lots of songs. And in fact, when I was at the National, I did do my first musical I did. It was called Tiger, which was written by Adrian Mitchell and was kind of a jazz musical, and it was directed by John Dexter and Michael Blakeney. And that was the first proper big musical I ever did. This is way back in 1972.
It's not a musical I've heard of, I'm afraid. Tiger.
Oh, yeah, Tiger. It's sort of recently, it occasionally gets revived by drama groups and things, but there's a couple of good songs in there.
Yeah, have to give my eye.
Yeah. And I remember getting a bit infatuated by William Blake, and then I started writing...
As in Tiger. But
yeah. Writing songs to all these songs of innocence and experience. So as well as writing pop songs, I was writing... I say more sophisticated, but I was trying to write different kinds of songs. So I've always dabbled, and still do, still write songs, and still have musical children who all play the piano, and one daughter who wants to be a rock chick. Yes, no.
You've got 4 of them.
Well, yeah, no, they all, except for Arthur. He did go for the trumpet, but he didn't go for it for very long. But all my daughters love music, and it forms a big part. So we are, almost a traditional music family, sit around the hearth, sort of eating hot cross buns and making songs. Lucy laughs. Dad, you speak such bull, Dad.
But the Henry of your musical, which Henry is it? Is it Henry VIII? Is it?
No, it's an everyman. It's about someone who gets lost and doesn't
Very
know.
Anthony Newley-ish.
Yes, it is Anthony Newley. And Anthony Newley, I did do a big musical film called Quilp. Unfortunately, I was dubbed in that, singing-wise, but that's because Elmer Bernstein wanted some Adenine kind of a transatlantic voice singing his ballads.
Let's get rid of character because it won't sell.
Yeah.
It might do, but no one ever tries. Yes.
No, that was a musical written by Anthony Newley based on the old Curiosity Shop, and I had this big ballad at the end of Act 1 plus another couple little ditties in it, and I played Kit Nubbles, who was Little Nell's best friend, and this was a big movie in 1984, and it was the last big movie that Anthony Newley did, really. So I mean, musicality has always been there, really, but I suppose it only kind of took off on the stage in the 90s.
Now, but an area you've been strong for many, many years, which I absolutely think is part of the musical tradition, is British pantomime.
Yep, absolutely.
And you've done them all, haven't you? But you've done Peter Pan a great many times.
I've done Peter Pan, played Peter Pan and Captain Hook, and written. And
Not in the same show, have
No, that would be good.
Yeah.
Although there is an element to say that they are very similar psyches, really, but
well, they are.
Both good and bad,
Yeah, I mean they are in some ways. I mean, there's a sequel. There's a modern sequel in which Peter Pan takes over from Captain Hook.
Yes, that's very understandable. I haven't seen that one, but Yeah, and we did an Afro-Caribbean version actually, which me and Mark, which was great fun.
Peter Pan.
Yeah. So it was a very
Very
yeah, because it was sort of island culture. So we livened that up, and I've done it a few times since actually.
Now there are so many different musical versions of Peter Pan, both in pantomime and, should we say, more traditional, because it's always a bit of a hybrid Peter Pan.
Well, to be honest, when he wrote it and he first did it, this is Jan Barry. He if you look at the original copy, right up to 1937, they would write different music every year. And it was very much a musical. Now, these songs don't exist because the musical wasn't regarded as particularly important. A different piece of music, so when Wendy sings a song or the Lost Boys sing, it was very much a Christmas kind of show with different music every year.
Certain core songs, but other songs added, yes, quite right.
Yeah, but there were, it was probably never and what, in the original plays, you'll get a snippet of a song, the lyrics, and then you have to add to it. So every year they would add a different song or a different lyric, and it's so the way it's carried on over the years, it's always been a bit of a hybrid panto show, because a lot of panto producers always want to turn it into a panto, so they cut out Hook's great speech and they tend to make it,
which is the chocolate on the mouth, which you use in your
I use a bit of that, which
is straight back from the original Barry play of 1904 or something, isn't it?
So I mean, I'm not that I'm a purist about it, because I think he always intended it to be knockabout, and in fact they were so naive in the early days, he didn't realise you had to have a front cloth to change the set to go from Leverland to the ship. So the reason these parts have evolved was because they had to have a front cloth. So Smee and Starkey came on and did a kind of a variety knockabout front cloth. So it goes back to the tradition.
Isn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think because he wanted to be more legit and he was in the West End, they tried to make it a bit more highfalutin. But it was popular because it was populist.
Now, when you played, let's talk about it in pantomime, the versions you've done. How do you approach the role of Peter Pan, and how do you approach? I like the fact that you say they're very similar in some senses, because Captain Hook is the interesting character, really.
Yeah,
and you've got to be fascinating and charming as well as evil.
Well, I approached playing Pan just with youthful effervescence, really. I didn't sort of, and a slightly mixed up child. I mean, it is a fantasy. I mean, you are living in a fantasy land, stealing children from mothers who drop them out of prams. So, it's a strange point to start with. And then slightly infatuated by death as opposed to life. Dying could be quite exciting. And I can relate to Peter Pan. I mean, there is a part of my psyche about physical risk-taking, which actually is something that makes you feel very alive. So, I mean, on a deeper sort of Stanislavski way, method acting way, I can relate to the part quite well. But I mean, I think it's about adventure, really. And a lot of the Pan stuff is about wanting to create the big fight at the end and defeating the baddie and all that, really.
And being a male Peter Pan is sometimes unusual. It's very often a female role.
It always was early female, because I think the idea is they wanted to represent the idea of a child playing it. And it was always a woman in her 30s who was an experienced.
I saw Bonnie Langford do it last year in Richmond.
Bonnie is classic, but I think it's a funny thing, isn't it? And then you get the Robin Williams version, which I didn't quite work.
That's the film, isn't it?
Yeah, and I thought the idea that it could be an older man pretending to be a boy doesn't quite work. I still think it could be a boy who's older. My Lucy's shaking her head. No, it doesn't work. Did you see me do it?
Robin Williams is brilliant.
There you go. See?
Oh, right, you're disagreeing with the...
Youth speaks. Youth is right. But I mean, like great panto, it's very adaptable. So it can become lots of different things.
And you have been a great pantomimeur, if I may say. You did a fantastic Cinderella with Richard Wilson a few years ago in Wimbledon. And you directed that, I think. You were Buttons too.
Yeah. Well, say from my mum and dad, I began with Kevin Wood, who now is chief exec of First Family, and we kind of brought panto back to the Hackney Empire initially in the early. Or was it the late 80s? No, it's the late 80s. And
taking it up with a vengeance now, haven't they?
Yeah.
Clive owns that theatre now, pretty much.
Yeah. So, in a sense, we began our early days of producing good old knockabout panto there. And then I've kind of gone from different production companies, either producing them myself and doing slightly more progressive ones. When I say progressive, I don't mean arty-farty, I mean progressive in the sense of playing with the genre and writing original music and and trying to sort of tell tales in a slightly different way. I mean, I did a sort of a kind of a Robin Hood where we had a live band with a hurdy-gurdy and get tight ropes, but very approachable, but adventurous. So, you know. And recently, in the last 4 years, I've been doing Oxford Playhouse's panto, which has been really interesting because as well as being able to sort of write it and direct it, I can cast it purely on talent because it doesn't, being a good rep, it doesn't have to have famous people in it. It has people in it who are, who are booked for their talents, and that gives you a lovely opportunity to look at the field. Not saying that people who are famous are not talented, but sometimes you want to cast somebody and they're not known.
But I think the trend's moving away from that. In the 80s in particular, London was full of pantos featuring, as seen on TV, X, Y and Z, the shaken back woman and wrestlers, and that's fine. But
I don't knock it either because someone like Ian Botham on stage at his peak was a genuine thrill for an audience. And even Frank Bruno. I mean, purists would say that.
Took me there, it's marvellous.
Would say that's a terrible thing, but as a populist medium, I think when they're properly helped and they're mixed with real, experienced artists, it's a great combination. It doesn't always work, if you pick people, the old the American soap syndrome, where you can have people actually who are well-trained musical theatre performers, but then someone who is just an Aussie comes over and has no, so it can go both ways. Really.
Here's the question in terms of panto. Your favourite role in panto that you've been in, and what's the best one? What's one you've enjoyed most directing? I suspect they may not be the same.
Well, I certainly enjoy playing Hook because I bring a sort of Johnny Depp campness to it, but trying to be evil but not succeeding terribly well, but then maybe achieving in a few moments.
Well, I enjoyed it because it's the first character you really adopt in your Daft and Dangerous here in Edinburgh, isn't it?
Yeah. So I
relish.
Yes, there is a relish in being bad, but at the same time a sort of sort of getting sympathy because he doesn't have a mother.
Yes.
Which kind of relates to Peter Pan stealing children from mothers. It's all that strange connection. But I think Indian Buttons. For an actor to play Buttons at my age is a great thing because Buttons has this great sympathy, pathos factor, really, and you can and that can go through the whole piece really, and you're instantly loved because you're in love with Cinderella and it never happens. And
yes, it's such a sad part. I always think.
Yeah, so I think in the true, those great sort of parts, those kind of characters that developed from hundreds of years ago, the sympathetic clown.
Well, it all goes back to that opera dell'arte thing.
Yeah.
So much of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that is
Pirandello and the sadness, the tear on the face. Yeah.
And you introduced Richard Wilson to pantomime. That was his first, wasn't it?
I'm not sure he's entirely pleased about that.
Well, you made him wear outside scout trousers, I remember.
Yes, we did. We did do a knockabout scout routine, didn't we? Yeah, which is just an old routine, really, the famous marching routine in sending up the scouts. About them being sort of always marching everywhere, really. And that worked well because a lot of the old sketches do. I mean, one of the hardest things when you produce pantos and you write pantos is to try and find a new comic scene. It is really hard because you're always trying to sort of find something surefire, but you don't know until you try it. So.
Yes, but the way the different routines come and go. I haven't seen the Tiddly Tree for years now, but the Tiddly Tree where the good person goes up to a tree and gets a bottle of whiskey.
Oh yeah.
Whereas it just gets flour in the face or.
Yes, I've heard it's called several things, isn't it?
But it's been knocking around 100 odd years, that one. But the one that's been in every pantomime I've seen for the last 5 years is everybody sitting on the bench singing the song to keep their spirits up while the ghost picks them off one by one.
The ghost gags, yes, yeah. That sort of formed into a... Yeah, it's always we're trying to find, you've sort of got to do a ghost gag of sorts, and it's, every year you sit down in a darkened room and think, how can I do this slightly differently to last year?
The best version I've ever seen of it, by the way, was when Stiles and Drew. Do you know George Stiles?
Yeah. Well, they wrote. Anthony Drew wrote some new lyrics for the card as well.
Did he now?
Yeah.
No, he's a huge talent. They're both very talented.
Yeah.
They did a pantomime at the Barbican a few years ago.
Yes, they did.
Which was Jack and the Beanstalk.
Yeah.
And they musicalised that scene and made it come to life again because it was a really good, catchy number that you could clap along with.
I never saw it because I was too busy doing mine, but I did want to see it. Yeah.
It was fantastic. But then again, so was Cinderella at Wimbledon. So. And I just want to know, in directing terms, what's the one you've most enjoyed?
Well, the ones I've most enjoyed in my panto career is really doing the Oxford ones, because for the first time I've been able to not be in it and sit outside it, so I've been able to craft it a lot more. And the pressure of directing and being is overwhelming. I mean, the reason you do it is because you have such a short rehearsal period, and if you get an enough director who doesn't know what they're doing, it's there's just not time to get it on there really, or get it on there in any, the deadlines are really tight, and it is back to the old tradition of turning up and doing it, and for people who come from a more legit background or a more measured background, that's a real shock. Learn the song, get up there, do it, these are the steps, that's the funny, this is the scene, the set's got to change, you do cut a minute out. I mean, it has that lovely immediacy, but at the same time people come with bits that are crafted already, so it's just fascinating in that respect. But what I've been able to do with Oxford, which is kind of 3 weeks rehearsal, is to...
Which is relatively luxurious, isn't it?
Yeah, but also it means in the summer, I can design parts of sets. I mean, I'm doing Jack this year, so I'm going to have a kind of a cyber giant and going into sort of the idea that the kids, like on a Wii, they can control the action on the stage.
Fantastic.
So there's all ideas like that you can put in that you couldn't do if you turned up and knocked it off, So the writing of it and the crafting it is great fun.
And as we've said all the way through this conversation, it goes straight back 150 years to the great Victorian musical and the great Victorian pantomime, which we still owe so much to, I think. I don't think people realise that modern theatre is still Victorian theatre in just posher clothes.
I don't think they do. I don't think people always know the roots. I mean, I think sometimes people discover things innately, but then, because we're all human beings, we're sort of mimicking something innately
it's only rediscovering, isn't it?
Yeah, and in terms of, how humour works or how physicality works, it's sort of, with the same species. So, I mean, it's not like I say people always copy, but as a child, your influences are enormous. When the first things you watch, I'm sure even any child watching a piece of Laurel and Hardy humour will remember it when they're older. And, if you pick up a plank, everyone will sort of twist it around and try and knock someone on the head, and you duck, and you get it back coming the other way. Now, I'm sure Laurel and Hardy didn't think of that. They were watching two builders actually knocking each other out. So
Peter, the big question for me is, what next for Peter Duncan?
I suppose I'll have a quick visit to the bank manager and see how much I've lost at Edinburgh.
Oh, don't.
I think what I sort of plan to do is to try and keep this one-man show genre going a bit. I mean, I do duck and dive between different stuff, really. I mean, I did a bit of Shakespeare last year, the Regent's Park playing Macbeth, and then I did. I've been making these travel documentaries as well, but I haven't done those for a while. Just finished my 5 years as Chief Scout, so I haven't got so much charity work to do. So I'm kind of into. I'm kind of into sort of being. I rather pretentiously say purely creative, but I'm into that stuff. I've just written my, in conjunction with somebody else, an autobiography. It was a biography written, but the publisher wants it to be an autobiography. So I've kind of adapted his thoughts on me. So it's been an interesting battle of wills. And I've got the copy edit in front of me. So that comes out, I think, mid of August. So it's called Duncan Dared, the autobiography.
I'm looking forward to that already, if I may say.
Lots of musical theatre.
Do you have a website?
I do.
People will want to know all about it.
I have got a website called here'soneimadeearlier.com, and there's one currently going in Edinburgh called dartanddangerous.com. So there's two, and they're linked together.
And we'll put both of those on our musical talk website, so
that'd
people
be lovely.
can carry on seeing it.
Be lovely. And there's a few songs on Here's One I Made Earlier as well. Some of the things we've talked about.
Peter, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much. I hope that you sell out for every remaining show here in Edinburgh. It's great. I'm also looking forward to the book and everything else you do. So
thank you very much. It's been nice to talk to you too.
Peter, thank you very much.
Musical Talk. And there we are. That was Peter Duncan, and he was a really lovely man. And he still is. He's also a very talented and enthusiastic man. And if you didn't get a chance to see his Jack and the Beanstalk, then make a point of trying to catch him in something else. And I have no doubt that we'll see him coming up with brand new theatrical ideas in the future.
And certainly he is one of those people I always make a point of looking out for at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, because he is often up there, appearing in a variety of shows, which once again just underlines his versatility and breadth. Now, as I recall this, we're in the middle of February here in the United Kingdom, and of course in an extended lockdown because of the coronavirus. And because of that, none of us know whether there's going to be an Edinburgh Festival Fringe this year in 2021. And if there is, how very different it's going to be, because social distancing may still be in place. We can't answer that question, so we don't know the future. But there's one thing I can predict, and that is that there'll be another episode of Musical Talk along next week. So I do hope that we can entice you to join us again for that. But for the time being, here's a phrase I made earlier, to borrow something from Blue Peter, and it's simply goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2021. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Musical Talk Thos.
Hooray!
Thank you.